Alright gamers, welcome to my 13.20 ADC tier list. Tier list is right here, and just now we're going to cover every change that is relevant to ADCs in the patch notes. Starting off with the Kai'Sa change. Base armor decreased, armor down by 3. So just straight up Kai'Sa nerf, pretty self-explanatory. Affects her early game a little bit more than the rest of her stages. So it's made her considerably weaker, a bit more scaling focused without actually increasing her scaling. So yeah, just straight up worse. As far as the impact on my tier list, I think I had her bottom of A tier. I've now moved her to somewhere at the top of B tier. Potentially, maybe she could belong more somewhere in bottom of B tier, but I don't think she's quite C tier. It's a considerable hit, but she was pretty good, so she could tank it and still be somewhat decent, so not too bad. After that, we've got the Jinx buff. So health growth increased, passive bonus total attack speed now stacks. Our cooldown decreased, base damage increased, ADC healing increased. So quite a lot of buffs here. So health growth up by 5 per level. This makes her, I want to say... Okay, I'm not going to bother doing the math, but somewhat tankier in the late game. Even in the mid game, it already starts to kick in a little bit, so it's quite nice. I don't know why they stacked on so many buffs at once, I gotta say. Maybe there is some juice to that theory that they buff champions who are about to get skins. Maybe it's in preparation for Arcane coming out. So it was maybe sooner than we expect, who knows. But anyway, aside from that, there was also stack on stacks. The 25% bonus total attack speed gained from Get Excited on takedowns now stacks. This is more impactful than you might think, because the wording on her passive in-game is actually a little bit misleading. In-game, it just tells you that you get 25% attack speed. Here the wording is still a little bit misleading, but actually like hints more what it really does. 25% bonus total attack speed. So it's not just a regular 25% attack speed, which is what you'd get from like buying 2 daggers. This is 25% of your total attack speed, not your ratio, base attack speed, whatever it's called. So the more attack speed you have, the more this 25% is increasing, which is just very different from how other attack speed boosts work within the game. I think this is the only one that works this way. Maybe Vera's passive is the same, I'm not entirely sure, but I actually didn't know that this works this way until this patch, and the stacking makes it really obvious that that is how the thing works, because it keeps stacking with itself, which is kind of obscene. You will see there are some Jinx clips from this patch that just don't really make sense, because she can get attack speed amounts that have just not been possible since like the old Kog'Maw. Actually, even higher. The old Kog'Maw used to be capped at 5.0 attack speed. You can currently get like over 10 attack speed realistically on Jinx in a game that you're not trying to troll build or anything, just by circumstances that happen within the game. But this is also like, as obscene as some of the clips may look, at the same time it's very niche because you have to stack your attack speed so many times to even get to an amount where the attack speed is completely obscene. The rest of the time, you don't necessarily even get to use your total attack speed because you're busy kiting, and so you're limited to how fast you can kite. It does make your attack speed like ridiculously high against turrets though, for example, and onto inhibitors. So if you can take down a turret or an inhibitor a lot faster now than you could in previous patches, then you can, it just helps you like keep that passive stacked up and get objectives that you wouldn't otherwise get, and also use that damage to you know, clean up fights that you previously weren't maybe able to clean up before. It is a bit niche though, because you're not guaranteed to be able to use this at all in any particular game. A lot of the time when I get to like 5.0 attack speed, since I've been playing some Jinx on this patch, it's like, oh cool, I've got that much attack speed, but they're all dead, so I can't, or they're all running from me and they're all too far away to hit, so I can't actually use it. But there are occasionally team fights that you can just completely decimate because your passive is really stacked up. It's just very rare. So it's a pretty decent buff, but not like the completely broken buff that some people may say that it is. Then the buff on her ultimate is just 5-second reduction at all levels. And the minimum damage has gone up by 2.5 base damage. While the minimum AD ratio has gone up by 1.5. And then the maximum damage, which is about like the entirety of your screen away. I think I think I've heard it said that the max range for her ultimate to get max damage, I think, is about Jinx W range, which is about your screen. So it doesn't take like your R traveling across the entire map to get the max damage, right? This is something you can actually realistically achieve in combat, at least onto enemies that are running away from you. So the max damage has increased by, where was that? Oh, here at the bottom. 25 base damage, and then 15% bonus AD. So that is quite a bit overall. Like, I've definitely noticed my rocket on Jinx doing a whole lot more damage this patch. As for which of these changes is actually more impactful, it's hard to say, because it's, like I said, it's kind of hard to gauge the impact of this passive buff when a lot of games it just doesn't do anything, because you don't have anybody to actually attack after you get these stacking resets. But I think they're all pretty solid buffs by themselves, so it's just weird that they come like all at once. Like, her win rate change this patch was just like really ridiculous. It went from 48.20 to 51.07, and I think the win rate just keeps going up and up per day. I don't know why that does, but it's kind of weird, because you would think that when a champion's pick rate shoots up as it has, their win rate would go down as more and more newcomers begin to play the champion. I've actually noticed often the opposite effect, where the more people play the champion, the more their win rate goes up. And I can't explain why that would happen, but it does seem to be what's happening with Jinx, where she got buffed here on the 11th of October, and there was a win rate increase that day for sure, and then it increased again, and then it increased again. And if I look at today's stats, I'm guessing, no, okay, it hasn't actually increased today. So maybe we've already hit the peak. But yeah, it's probably just a slightly higher than 51.07 actually. Which, you know, is almost a 3% win rate increase, you know, really high. Kind of crazy. So I don't know why they would like leave her weak for so long and then suddenly buff her into like S tier immediately. But it's what they've decided to do. I guess they probably just didn't want to touch her at all while pro play was still going on, because there's been a lot of Jinx in pro play recently. So I guess they didn't want her taking over worlds at the slightest buff, but now she's good to take over solo queue. Alright, that's all the direct champion changes for this patch, and then there's also the systems changes. We'll start off with the Duskblade nerf, which of course I forgot, I should have mentioned it with the Kai'Sa change since we went over the impact to her on this patch. It wasn't just her own nerf that impacted her, the -3 armor. There's also this Duskblade change, which is -5 ability haste, and then damage amplification has gone from 0 to 18% to 0 to 16%. I don't really know which one of these is more impactful, to be honest. It's one of those changes that's just hard to gauge again, but yeah, two changes at once. I actually can't really find a reliable way to actually see how much of an impact this item has had, because I can't use Kai'Sa as a case study because Kai'Sa also got a direct nerf. I can't use Zed as a case study because Zed also got a direct nerf. And when I look at the list of champions, I can't think of a single one that uses Duskblade as their primary item. So I find it really hard to tell like how much a champion's win rate went down just because of Duskblade, because almost every champion that uses it also has like indirect stuff affecting them as well. So yeah, I can't really say whether this nerf was big or not, but you know, it's definitely a nerf for sure. And even if they're both like small changes, you know, it's two changes at once, so it's bound to have some impact over Kai'Sa as well. Her win rate went down by about 1%, I believe. So yeah, so any ADC that was building Duskblade as lethality as well, that win rate has gone down. Fortunately, like if you were playing something like Miss Fortune lethality, most people were already using Youmuu's anyway. Personally, I prefer Duskblade. So for me, my build on Miss Fortune, that performance would go down this patch. But if you were using Duskblade as well, no worries, because not only did Youmuu's not get nerfed, it actually got buffed. So you can actually, so I would say they were about very similar strength before. I just used Duskblade out of personal preference. But now if you're playing Miss Fortune, her performance would have actually gone up slightly this patch if you're just using Youmuu's. I actually forgot to consider that here. Maybe I could have placed her out somewhere like further up here, but I don't think she's probably going to be S tier just because of that anyway. It wasn't that big a buff, but we will cover that now actually, now that I think about it. Here we go. So Spectral Shard lethality, is that when she's at full stacks? Let me see. Start of fight lethality. Yeah, this doesn't actually completely specify, but I'm guessing this means when you're at max stacks from the Yomus, then you hit a target and you get that amount of lethality for however long. It's gone from 3 to 12 to 7 to 18, so max lethality is increased by 6, and minimum lethality is increased by 4, which is a pretty decent buff. Let me just see if there's a win rate increase to Misfortune from this. I did see her win rate went up, actually. Let's see, so... one item win rate at least went from 52.81% to 53.73%. That's actually almost a 1% win rate increase. Not bad. You know what? Let's just pretend I put her here at the top of A tier. Could even be that it warrants like a 3-way split in S tier, to be honest. I'm sad I didn't notice that sooner. I was only thinking about the Dustblade nerf. Yeah, well. Trying to think. Yeah, so I think I would probably put Misfortune in S tier, actually. I don't want to edit it now. Well, I'll edit it now, actually. It's not that hard to do. There we go. Pretend she was here the whole time. If I can move her. There we go. Not that it's too important. I don't know really whether she's stronger than Jinx or not. I guess they're about similar. I mean, I don't think there's a huge difference in win rate or performance between any of these 3 S tier ADCs. They're usually quite similar. The reason why I have Vayne and Nila higher is because actually that is a pretty big difference. Alright. There we go. We'll refresh this. Boom. Misfortune in S tier. Lovely. And then after that, final change for this patch well, there is also the Lord Dominic's change, but this was intended to be power neutral, and I don't have any reason to assume that it's not power neutral. Apparently there was a bug with the passive Giant Slayer from Lord Dominic's that, let's see, they'll probably explain it better than me. Triggered after things... well, they're not really explaining it well here, but as far as I understand, it means that the damage amplification wasn't occurring onto shields. So like if any target was shielded, you weren't getting the proper damage amplification. Whereas now they've fixed that. But because they figured Lord Dominic's was already in a good state before that bug fix, they may as well like slightly nerf it to compensate for that. So what they've done is they've moved the damage increase from 0 to 25% to instead 0 to 22%. I don't know what before lifesteal means. I'm wondering if there's something I don't get here. As far, like, I only understood that it was to do with shields. I don't get what lifesteal has to do with anything, to be honest. Weird. Yeah, so that's the one indirect, well, change. Probably doesn't really affect the ADCs too much anyway. Then we've got the snowball changes, which may have been a big impact, may not have been. We'll have to wait and see, but we'll cover quickly what these anti-snowball changes have been. The impact has been actually decent. I just mean that I don't know if it really impacts the ADC meta, for example, but it has impacted the game quite a bit, which I'll cover in a second as well. So they started off by nerfing Drakes. The whole reason for this, by the way, is that they weren't satisfied with the snowballing in the game. They felt like if one team got ahead, they were almost certainly going to stay ahead and win the game, which meant that games that were like 25 minutes long were already decided like 10 minutes, which is boring for everyone. Nobody wants to win it 10 minutes and then drag it out for 15 minutes, just ending on as a formality. Nobody wants to have their 25-minute game lost at 10 minutes and then have to play out a miserable 15 minutes remainder of the game either. They want the game to be more like, you know, preferably always having a fighting chance. You know, if you get stomped, okay, fair enough, but they felt that it was a bit too easy to be on the stomp, to create a stomp to the point where the other team couldn't get back into the game. So they wanted to reduce the amount of snowballing in the game. And the way they decided to do that was they nerfed each individual Drake. You can read this here. I'm not going to bother listing out every single change. But then to compensate for that, they did buff the Drake souls, so that getting 4 Drakes is still valuable, because they needed that to be a win condition that a team can win the game off of. That being said, it is probably still less valuable, in my opinion, to get 4 Drakes now than it was in previous patches, just because even though the buff itself has been buffed, you are getting less stats from having 4 Drakes stacked up, which, you know, these changes are like minor on a Drake by Drake basis, but when you stack them all up, you're actually losing out on a lot of stats having 4 Drakes now compared to having 4 Drakes in previous patches, and I don't think that the buff to the souls has really compensated for that. So this is just, you know, trying to still create an incentive, obviously, to have 4 Drakes to, you know, to get the soul, but it's not actually buffing having 4 Drakes, you know? It's still overall worse to get Drakes, and obviously you still want to get them, but it's going to be less game deciding, which is good in my opinion. Then local gold from Rift Herald has also gone down by 100. It's a pretty minor change compared to other stuff, but I guess it's okay. Not forgetting anything actually, am I? No. Baron health has gone up to make it harder to burst down, so one team can't just rush Baron immediately when they have a lead, or when they find the cheesy opportunity to rush it. This is one thing that also can contribute to like increasing the amount of time it takes for increasing the average game time, which makes it easier to also impact the game as the average ADC, since most ADCs are fairly scaling focused, which is quite nice. And there's the death timer adjustments. So I actually forgot about this. I played some games on this patch, and I kept being constantly surprised by how fast the enemy ADCs kept walking into lane at certain points, especially the Misfortunes. Like, I would kill a Misfortune, shove in the wave, and think about hitting the turret, and Misfortune would just already be walking back into lane. I'd be like, oh, must have lost track of time there pushing the wave. I swear I just killed her. And it's only when I was like reading this, I knew that they lowered death timers, I just completely forgot about it. And then when I read this again to like make sure I was making my tier list properly, I was like, oh, right, that explains all those times where somebody walked into lane really fast after I killed them. So you may not think it's much, but it definitely helps a lot to get into lane faster after you've been killed, in order to miss less CS, and therefore your lane opponent snowballs less, or in other words, sets you less behind, so you still have a fighting chance even after you fall behind initially. And then there's also the fact that turret plate gold has gone down by 50, which is, I guess, disproportionately a nerf to champions who actually specialize in getting platings, like Caitlyn, for example, or Tristana. But overall, it just means that the amount of gold to be gained from winning lane is lower now than it was in general before. So even laners like, say, Lucian, who are not amazing at pressuring platings, if they were like perma-killing you, they get a lot of time to hit the turret. Well, now that turret is less valuable to hit because they get less gold from it. And not only that, but because they could mainly only hit the turret when you were dead, well, you're dead less time now, so that gives them even less gold that they can gain from winning their lane. So yeah, it's done a lot to reduce snowballing. I've actually compiled a list of things to emphasize just how much that has actually impacted the game. We can start with, hang on, where is this? Game durations. So, unfortunately, this site doesn't really let me go back and see what the average game duration was before the changes, but I've actually been on this page before, like probably multiple times each season. Usually game times were, I want to say, between 25 and 28 minutes, depending on the season, depending on the patch. I've never seen average game times, even in Loyalo, be 30 minutes long. This is like an absurdly high increase. Then you also have even higher game durations in games excluding surrenders, which obviously makes sense. They're obviously going to be higher. It's a little bit misleading because this, by nature, games that don't get surrendered are going to be closer already than games that aren't surrenders. But yeah, I mean, so the games that don't end in surrender still, I mean, it takes until Diamond for the average game time to become lower than 30 minutes, which is like crazy. We haven't had this long average games in so long. This is probably the best patch we've had in terms of the lowered effectiveness of snowballing since maybe season 6, season 7, maybe even sooner. Like, it's definitely not like modern League of Legends has not been like this in a long ass time. It's actually mind-blowing that we actually see game times being this long. I wonder if Riot will actually be displeased with that and make some changes to bring game times lower while trying to keep snowballing the same as it is. But I don't know, because I mean, I like game times like this. I think most ADC players probably prefer longer game times as well. You know, we play ADC, a highly item reliant role. We like having a lot of items. We like having games that reach a lot of items so we can try and impact the game. So we're probably going to be all big fans of this. Just depends whether Riot are big fans of it as well. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't, so long as games are not going to like 50 minutes. That is probably getting a bit too long. But that's just the average game time. We can get a little bit more specific here. They do infographics per patch, so we can actually compare a little bit. I won't bother bringing up the other one, but I already compared 13.19 to 13.20. And so games that end at 15 minutes are now... Well, games that end at 15 minutes happen now 0.4% less than they did on 13.19. Games that end in 20 minutes occur 1.5% less than they did in the previous patch. Games that end at 25 minutes occur minus 2.2%. Well, they occur 2.2% times less than on the previous patch. And then 30-minute games also occur 1.1% less than it did on the previous patch. So every duration of game time that is below 35 minutes has become less frequent. You would think like even 30 minutes is already kind of late into the game, so maybe by that point that's when it would start to like stay the same or maybe like even increase, but no. 35 minutes is the point where the game time has started trending towards. It's not suddenly become like the vast majority of games are going past 35 minutes, but as you can see here, actually 35 minutes has now become like the highest or most common time for a game to end. More common than 30 minutes, more common than 25 minutes, more common than 20 minutes. And likewise, on the previous patch, it used to be more common for games to end at 25 minutes than 40 minutes. Whereas on this patch, it is slightly more common for games to end at 40 minutes than 25 minutes. This is probably a little bit misleading. I'm assuming they're probably rounding this up. So I think there's actually quite a big difference between a game ending at 37.6 minutes compared to ending at 40 minutes. It doesn't sound like a huge difference, but I rarely actually see games reaching the full 40 minutes. Was just below 40 minutes is actually quite common, I think. So that is why, if you're thinking that doesn't sound right, that is probably why, because it is rounding up from 37.5. If it's below 37.5, it would be counted towards 35 minutes. Yeah, so games that end at 35 minutes have also increased by 1.9%. No, sorry, 1.5%. Games that end at 40 minutes have become 1.9% more common, which is actually the biggest increase. So this is the game tier, game duration tier that has changed the most from these changes. We're seeing a lot more 40-minute games, or, rounded up to, than we did in any previous patch. And that it is like the biggest change, how do I explain this? I'm trying to think of the right wording. The change from the previous patch to this patch in regards to getting more 35-minute games is not as big as the change from the previous patch to this patch in regards to getting more 40-minute games. That's what I'm trying to say. And then as far as 45-minute games goes, we're also seeing 1.1% more of those. 50-minute games, we're seeing 0.4% more of those, and 55 minutes, we're seeing 0.1% of those. More of those. So, yeah, so everything from, if we consider this as the middle point of the graph, everything to the left has become a lot less common, and everything to the right has become a lot more common. It is still overall slightly more biased to the left, like you can see. So this graph here is a whole lot bigger than this. Well, this bar here is a whole lot bigger than this bar here. Or not a whole lot bigger, but a little bit bigger than this bar here. This bar here is a little bit bigger than this bar here. But this 20-minute mark whole lot bigger than this 45-minute mark here. So overall, games are still a little bit more biased towards ending before the 30-minute mark. Well, at or before the 30-minute mark. It is, so I think it's like just barely above half of games are ending before or at 30 minutes, which means that just barely half, or just a little bit below half of games are going past 35 minutes or more, right? Which is a little bit better than used to be in previous patches. So, what is the point of this? The point of this is that game times have gone up, which naturally should benefit hypercarries more than other picks. I haven't actually made any like changes on my tier list though, just based on that, because it is hard to say exactly like how much does a hypercarry's value increase when you increase game times by 3 minutes. I don't know that. And the data is not yet conclusive enough to say whether there has been a huge impact in win rates for hypercarries. In fact, confusingly, it's been the opposite. Aphelos' win rate went slightly down. Zeri's win rate went slightly down. A reason for that, though, I've realized could be that the Doran's Blade changes, which I guess actually I should cover because they're somewhat important as well. Plus 2 AD, plus 20 HP. This was to nerf jungle by getting every laner to start Doran's items and buffing the Doran's items. So because junglers can't get Doran's items, it makes laners better. It makes laners better and nerfs junglers. Sorry, I've had too much coffee. So this has like, therefore like kind of indirectly nerfed Cole and Longsword because they didn't also get respective buffs. And so hypercarries like Aphelos and Zeri were starting Cole, which is, and they're still like, it's still more popular for them to rush Cole, even though they shouldn't be. So this is like nerfing their win rate more than it would nerf a champion's win rate who's more used to running Doran's Blade already anyway, right? So, but that's an example of like how like minimal the changes may have been in terms of impacting a carry. If the Doran's Blade changes are more impactful over win rates than the game times, you know? So I don't want to jump the gun here and just suddenly start putting all hyper carries in the A tier and S tier, and then all the early game carries in B tier and C tier. Maybe there could be some more like changes within the tiers to like move some better scaling champions up and some worse scaling champions down. But I'm not too bothered about the exact placement in each tier anyway. And like I said, I want to wait for some more data. By 13.21, I'll probably do a more comprehensive shakeup of this entire tier list and start to adjust for, you know, any kind of indirect changes that may have been creeping up along the patches that I wasn't catching, and just reevaluate in depth every single ADC's placement. It's about time I do that, and definitely with a change like this, I will want to do that. I just can't do it right now because I need more data. But yeah, so those changes are in effect though. Hypercarries, or scaling champions in general, a little bit more benefiting of this patch than others. That being said, it's probably not a huge deal, or maybe it is. Who knows? Make of it what you will. Aside from that, we haven't had any Vayne changes this patch, but I have put her from like A tier to S. Well, not even S tier, Nila tier. I've put her in Nila tier. The Nila tier is now Nila and Vayne, and then S tier best picks that aren't Nila and Vayne. Yep. So why have I put Vayne in S tier? Because I already thought that she was quite underrated, but then I realized I was probably actually even underrating her, like I wasn't even appropriately rating her effectiveness. And the reason for that is that I think she's actually insanely busted with fleet footwork. I think when you optimize Vayne's, like everything about Vayne's builds, you get a much better champion than when you optimize any other ADC's builds right now. Because, let's see, so for example, Triforce over Ginsu's, you get a 3% win rate increase, but still 21% of people are using Ginsu's anyway. That's dragging down her win rate, and her win rate is already pretty good as it is, right? So Vayne is in a pretty decent spot no matter what build you're using. But when you use her best build, I think she becomes completely obscenely broken. When you use Ghost over Heal as well, for example, that alone is a 2% win rate increase, which is pretty high. And then, so 56.34% win rate for a 2-item build is pretty solid, right? This is a pretty solid win rate. based off this alone, I would have an ADC either an A tier or S tier, depending on whether they're like a scaling pick or an early game pick, because that impacts like how big a deal it is for a win rate to be a certain amount at 3 items. Like if this was a really early game focused pick that still had a really good win rate, like 65% at 3 items, that would be instantly busted. But for a scaling champion, it's not as weird. Whereas for a scaling champion, for example, having 52.6% win rate already at the first item purchase, that's actually a pretty big deal. So she's pretty solid no matter what, right? Then we also consider that I've been thinking for like so many patches now that Fleet Footwork Vayne is super underrated, because Fleet Footwork synergizes really well with Static Shiv, which is the core item on Vayne right now. It also synergizes quite well with Triforce as well, but most importantly with Static Shiv, or alternatively Stormraiser if you prefer to run that. Either one of these, Static Shiv or Stormraiser, are both super good on Vayne. So I think having Fleet Footwork just makes it super good on her, because you can just queue forwards, get those queue trades. Vayne is like the best one at abusing Fleet Footwork, because, you know, anytime it's up, you just queue forwards, and it's pretty much, there are very few circumstances where you would not be able to reach the opponent if you just queue forwards onto them, right? So it's basically the same as having super high range to proc your Fleet Footwork with. Then there's also the fact that her Q also generates Fleet Footwork stacks. I think it's like 12 stacks per Q. And because her Q is so spammable, she's just generating so many stacks and generating so much sustain from Fleet Footwork compared to other ADCs. And then another optimization that people are not doing yet, which I'm shocked by, is the fact that Q is right now just a whole lot better than WMAX. Should be doing QMAX. It has 2% higher win rate than WMAX. This is because they nerfed W and buffed Q, I want to say like 10 patches ago. People are still not catching on to the fact that this made Q a whole lot better than W. It is probably not quite as big as 2% really, because I'm gonna guess there's probably more QMaxers that are using Static Shiv and Trinity Force, which is their best build, than WMAXs, for example. So its win rate would be affected by more than just its own effectiveness. But I still want to say it's a pretty big win rate difference. Like, you should be a whole lot better, especially with this build. Like, part of the whole reason why this build is so good is because it synergizes really well with QMax. But then what happens when we add all of this together, for example? What if we're doing Fleet Footwork with QMax? Well, now suddenly we have a 56.1% win rate in the 56.1% win rate ADC. And so this is a little bit misleading, because this is slightly inflated just based off of the fact that it takes games only that reach at least I guess level 13, which basically rules out a whole lot of games where Vayne got stumped and didn't reach level 13. But every ADC has the same inflation on their own pages, and none of them have anywhere near close to a 56.1% win rate with the right keystone, right? This is absurd. And then when you look at her ideal build as well with Fleet Footwork, it's 58.9%. 58, like I said, 56% is pretty solid, right? 58, nearly 59% for a 2-item win rate is absurd. The only ADC that has had that, I want to say in like the past 3 years, probably longer, is Nila. That is why we've put Vayne in Nila tier. We'll probably, next patch, we'll probably name it to Vayne and Nila, or we'll call it God tier or Z tier. I don't know what the cool kids call it. I just called it Nila tier before because she was the only one there. But, yeah, at the moment it's shared by Vayne and Nila. I don't see any reason why that'll change next patch. I don't think Vayne is on Riot's radar, because most people are still not using Fleet Footwork, though they should be. But yeah, so ideal build order, or sorry, skilling order is much better when you combine it with Fleet Footwork, and her ideal build, again, much better when you combine it with Fleet Footwork. Now, if you were to combine Fleet Footwork with Static Shiv and Triforce, with also the QMax, that would probably be quite a high win rate. Unfortunately, the site doesn't quite let me narrow down the data to just that, but I wish it could, because it would be probably a very impressive win rate. But yeah, so no changes to Vayne this patch, but I was kind of underrating how effective she is, because I knew Fleet Footwork was really good on her. I knew Static Shiv and Trinity Force or Stormrazor and Trinity Force were really good on her. I knew QMax was really good on her. I didn't really fully account for how good they are when you combine them all together. That's why I was underrating her a little bit. When I kind of realized that, it was like midway through my last patch note that I thought, huh, actually maybe she should be higher than A tier. When I stopped to think about it, I was like, nope, not even S tier. She belongs in Neela tier. She is disgustingly good. So yeah. I'll also cover briefly Senna. So Senna got a buff to... not exactly to her ADCing, but she got a buff period. I think it was on 13.18 maybe. Which was the time that I decided to put Senna from C tier to B tier. Top of B tier, in fact. Because I think she's actually decent. I was considering maybe even putting her a little bit higher. But I've decided not. I think I've probably placed her right in top of B tier. She's probably not really any better than that. So she's not like amazing, but I do think she is definitely quite underrated. Like a lot of people would think right now that Senna is just terrible, when really she's actually okay. And super solid scaling as well. She's actually probably the best scaling ADC, period. Alongside Zeri and Aphelios. So actually, in that regard, this patch may have indirectly buffed her, like I said, but it's probably not that big a deal. But we'll see. Next patch, I'll have a better idea of how much this patch benefited scaling ADCs. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe to see more content like this, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Later, gamers.